Welcome back to Everything Meta. Let's just dive right into today's topic because it is pretty important. Today, the Bureau of Labor released some data on the Consumer Price Index. But before we get to the Consumer Price Index, I think I need to give you guys a quick microeconomics lesson first to make sure you fully understand what is going on here because it is pretty important. Now, the Consumer Price Index helps us understand inflation. Inflation is the rate at which goods and services rise. Now understand that there's a strong inverse relationship between the rate of inflation and interest rates, aka low interest rates, high inflation. And when I say interest rates, I'm talking about the federal funds rate. This is the interest rate charged by a lender, such as the government, to a borrower, such as Wells Fargo. Because yes, banks need to borrow money from the government at a short-term basis to fulfill specific regulatory requirements that we won't get into. But this is also the rate charged by lenders, this time also being Wells Fargo, to borrowers like you. Now, this rate is set by the Federal Reserve, aka the central bank of the US. And as I said, banks like Wells Fargo borrow money from the Federal Reserve, aka the central bank, all the time to meet regulatory requirements. But once again, we will not get into this because it is not important for this discussion. But know that when interest rate is high, banks borrow less money from the central bank, and now banks have less money. There is less money flowing in the United States. And with less money flowing in the United States, the economy slows down. Let me summarize this. The interest rate determines the price of holding and loaning money. Banks pay you an interest rate on your savings account to attract you to deposit money into your savings account. So then banks can take that money and loan it out and receive an interest rate. So when interest rates are low, individuals and businesses tend to have higher demand for loans. That's what it is. When interest rates are low, people borrow more money, they have more money, they spend more money, the economy grows, and inflation rises. And thus, there is the inverse correlation between interest rates and inflation. But let us talk about inflation just one more time and why it increases because you might still be confused. Let's do this by talking about what happened the last 2 years. When COVID happened, everyone panicked and people thought the economy was going to crash. The Federal Reserve, the central bank, the AKA, the government, it's all the same. They lowered rates until it was nearly zero. Today it's at 0.08%. And usually it's over 1 over 2%. Now it being so low stimulated the economy because rates were so cheap, were so low that now it's cheap for Wells Fargo to borrow money from the government. It was cheap for you to borrow money from the government or to borrow money from banks and get a mortgage and buy a car and get groceries. And people bought more and more and the economy grew. But now people are buying so much that the demand is high and everyone wants to buy. So prices have to keep up with demand. It's simple supply and demand. There is an equilibrium that needs to be met with supply and demand. With more demand, supply either needs to increase or prices need to increase to lower demand back. But know that there is a huge supply chain problem in the US as well today that we also won't get into. But know that with this supply chain, it makes it harder to increase the supply, which puts more stress on the prices needing to increase. There you have it, voila, price increase. That is the very definition of inflation. And in an ideal world, average inflation is 2 to 3%. Last month, it was 6.8% year over year. Today, the data that they released, as you can see right here, it says over the last 12 months, all the items increased 7% before seasonal adjustment. 7% is a lot. So how do we decrease inflation? To decrease inflation, you do the opposite. You increase interest rates. So as interest rates are increased, consumers tend to put more money into their savings accounts because returns from savings are now higher. And with less disposable income being spent, with less mortgage, less car buying, less groceries, the economy tends to slow down and demand decreases. So prices decrease, meaning inflation decreases. And that's it. Not only are consumers putting money into savings accounts, but so are investors. And this is what you're here for. So are investors. Investors are taking money out of the stock market, out of crypto, out of these risky assets and investing it in saving accounts, in government bonds. And when they take money out of crypto and stocks, that means there is less demand for crypto and stocks. So the price of crypto and stocks decreases. As I mentioned, the CPI report mentioned the inflation rate was 7%, which is high. And remember, the average is 2 to 3%. The government will need to increase interest rates to decrease inflations. Investors will pull out more money out of crypto and stocks, and it will likely drop. But this is something that has already happened, been anticipated, and it's already started to happen. So that's why you may have noticed that with the data today, the stock market is actually trading up. And it's all about surprises. It's people have do this stuff immediately once they kind of get a hint of something. So because the data that came out to the 7%, it wasn't a surprise. Like people were expecting this. So we didn't see the market crash or anything like that because people were already expecting it. They already did what they needed to do. But what today's report does, it just gives us more color into how high these interest rates will need to increase. And if investors will in fact keep pulling out more money. So as I mentioned, what we saw today was not unexpected. Cryptos and stocks are trading up because nothing crazy happened. But it does show us the initial impact of Omicron. We're gonna have to stay tuned and see what's going on. But yeah, if you look at these reports, you just right here is where it breaks down all of the consumer price information. So as I mentioned, it is 7% increase for this year, for the last 12 months. So that's all I got for you folks today. This is an important topic, and I think everyone should be familiar with the economics behind it and why it works. So if you learned anything new, I'd appreciate if you hit the like and subscribe button, and I will try to keep you guys updated on everything meta. And I guess for today, the economy. Thank you, folks.